I'm the professor in charge of this research center, and we are going to have a series of webinars that cover various aspects of research support. And we are starting today with a webinar on statutory compliances in bioengineering research. And we are extremely fortunate to have with us Dr. Urmila Thatte and Dr. Sreelekha Gopinathan. And let me hand over to my colleague, Dr. Sneha Ranade, for introducing today's speakers.
Thank you, Debjani. It is a pleasure to introduce the speakers for today. Let me just open this. So we have Dr. Thatte, Urmila Thatte, and Dr. Sreelekha Gopinathan today. Dr. Thatte is an emeritus professor in Department of Clinical Pharmacology, which is in Seth GS Medical College and KM Hospital. The areas of interest include ethics in biomedical research, rational use of drugs in developing countries, pharmacogenetics, therapeutic drug monitoring, platelet pharmacology. She has more than 300 publications in national and international journals, including 10 books, and she is listed among the top 2% scientists in the world based on citations of papers. She's also on the core team of National Ethical Guidelines for Biomedical and Health Research involving human participants. We also have today Dr. Sreelekha Gopinathan. She has done her MTech in Polymer Technology from QSAT Kerala. She has done PhD from IIT Bombay. She's currently a technical officer in IRCC IIT Bombay. Her areas of work include being a member secretary of Institute Ethics Committee. She is also on the award review committees of the Institute, central research facilities of the Institute. She is also part of the Research Infrastructure Funding Committee, and she is involved in liaising with the faculty members. With this brief introduction, I hand over the stage to Dr. Thatte to start the talk.
Thank you very much, Sneha, for this lovely introduction. Can I share my slides?
Yes.
If you stop sharing yours.
Yes.
Oh. Okay, we are going to talk mainly about clinical research. None of you may be involved in clinical research directly, but even when you take samples from people or take samples from patients, you still are doing some sort of clinical research. So I'm going to take you through the historical evolution of some of the important guidances that have evolved because of tragedies most of the time. We all know about the Nazi experimentation that people had done, and apart from punishing many of the doctors, they also came up with at that time the Nuremberg Code, which for the first time talked about the fact that informed consent is a right and not an option. So for the first time now in 1949, we were told that you have to take the informed consent of the participant before taking him in a study. Then came the Declaration of Helsinki, which was adopted first by the 18th World Medical Assembly in 1964 in Helsinki. And that's why the Declaration of Helsinki it's called. It was only in 1975 in Tokyo by the 29th WMA first time they described that the protocol needs to be submitted to an independently appointed body for consideration and approval. That is the Ethics Committee. And the current version of the Declaration of Helsinki is adopted in the 64th WMA Assembly in Fortaleza, Brazil, October 2013. The tragedies just don't seem to stop, because I am not sure if you're aware of this public health story that happened in the United States of America, where Talia Ferro Clark, who was the head of the Public Health Service, instituted a study for 40 years almost, where the natural course of untreated syphilis was looked at. People were not treated, people were not given anything. Of course, at that time, there was nothing. In 1932, there was no medicine available. It was mainly done in African American men with a dubious consent. And worst of all, I think, is that even 1940, penicillin became available and it cured the disease. This was not given to the people. Those people were not given the option of treatment. From this, apart from many other things that Bill Clinton did, all this happened at that time. But the president at that time instituted a National Commission for Protection of Human Subjects of Biomedical Research. And in April 1979, the Belmont Report was published. And the Belmont Report talks about 3 ethical principles: respect for the person, which is sort of implemented by respecting the autonomy of that individual. When you say autonomy, it means that you take the informed consent. Beneficence, that means your research should be of benefit to science and society. Some benefit has to accrue. Don't do it just for the sake of science. And of course, non-maleficence, which is that do not harm anybody. That is the principle, basic principle of which we take as a Hippocratic oath. And last is this justice, that is equitable distribution of benefits and burdens. I'm going to ask you these 3 questions afterwards. Respect for the persons, beneficence, and justice. Remember these 3 always. And that brings me against this background to what are the statutory compliance for clinical studies, before which I want to just define what is clinical research. It is a systematic investigation in human beings to produce generalizable knowledge. I want to tell you one more thing, and please be patient with me for this and understand it. Teacher-student relationship changes when your student becomes a participant and you become the investigator. Please remember, it is like I always say that when the teacher is the heavier person, is giving the knowledge to the student, that is one way. But when the student is participating in research and being the research candidate, research participant, then the student is the one who is at the bottom of the seesaw and is the one giving of his body and information to the researcher. Okay, now compliance is needed to 4 issues: ICMR ethical guidelines, the NDCT rules, the new drugs and clinical trials rules, and GCP, which could be either Indian or ICH, and of course, most importantly, your ethics committee SOPs. Now, the ICMR guidelines were issued first policy was issued in 1980, and the first formal guidelines were released in 2000, and the second version came in 2006, and the current version is 2017, and it is available. And my strong recommendation is to you to download this. It's freely available, and read it, because there is a lot of issues over there which you will start understanding especially if you're doing any type of research. Now this, the whole ICMR guidelines is made of 12 chapters. I would like it if you could read responsible conduct of research, informed consent, vulnerability, and whatever is applicable to y'all: public health research, social and behavioral sciences, biological materials and biobanking data sets. This, I think, is very important for you. Humanitarian emergencies and disaster research. Now I'm going to touch upon a few aspects of this, what is covered in the ICMR guidelines. The first is about privacy and confidentiality. It is the responsibility of the researcher to ensure privacy and confidentiality of the data. Make sure that you take consent of the participant, especially if you're planning to publish any photos of the participant in your publication. International collaboration requires HMSC clearance. By definition, it requires any international collaboration. You need health ministry screening committee's approval. And this takes a long time. So if you, as soon as you start thinking of your international collaboration, you want to start thinking of HMSC. Only thing is HMSC requires that you submit it after your ethics committee approves. So getting the protocol in place and then getting HMSC approval is important. Remember, this HMSC approval is for all collaborative research, not just clinical research. Even if it's experimental, if it's collaborative research, you will have to talk to HMSC. If there is any transfer of data or biological sample, then you require a special MOU where, or material transfer agreement, where all this is put down about who owns it and how will you share the benefits, etc. Then comes payment for participation. The ethics committee will have to review and approve the payments if it is in cash or kind, and the processes involved, and make sure that there is no undue inducement. That means that the amount that you're giving is not so much as for the participant to feel that this is not, I don't have to worry about the risks. I will just take part in the research. So it is a good idea to reimburse expenses such as travel, or reimburse for the inconvenience, time, and or loss of wages, etc. Not to be made to pay extra for study investigations. And remember, this is very important, and may receive additional medical services at no cost. Always remember that if there are research-related harms, you must have a mechanism to pay for it, and the ethics committee will decide the quantum. The investigator-initiated studies, the institution becomes the sponsor and must have a mechanism to pay for all these adverse events, serious adverse events. All adverse events should be reported to the ethics committee. The SAEs have to be reported within 24 hours of knowing about it. The SAE being death or hospitalization, etc. Research project institutions must have a built-in mechanism for example, a corpus fund in an institution, or an insurance or government grants from agencies. So when you're applying for your grant, only please put this in your head. One of the heads should be research-related injuries. When there is conflict of interest, this is very important. You have to have a set of conditions where professional judgment concerning a primary interest, like participant welfare or validity of research, is unduly influenced by a secondary interest. Could be non-financial, like personal, academic, or political, or it could be financial. And institutions must develop, implement policies or procedures and educate staff. Researchers should disclose if they have any conflict of interest to the ethics committee. An ethics committee must evaluate these disclosed interests and take appropriate measures. Now, responsible conduct of research, I had told you I would request you to read it. I won't spend more time on this, but read that chapter. The ethics committee has to be independent, competent, and should do a time-bound review. There has to be a complete information disclosure. There are 4 elements of an informed consent process: complete information disclosure, decision-making capacity, and/or competence. I won't spend time on this because there's no time to do that, but these are very important: voluntarism and authorization. I just want to tell you that competence means legal competence. It is a legal term, and it is about the ability of a person to sign. It is not about their understanding as much as it is about the legal aspects. So for example, if they're children, then they cannot sign. Even if he is 17 years old, he cannot sign for this, for his own consent. He may understand everything. They are clever nowadays, but they will not be legally allowed to sign till they're 18. So a legally authorized representative will sign for them, which is usually a parent. And remember this one thing, because many times the first year students in IIT, any of the IITs will be 17 years old, sometime maybe 16. They're very young, so they're not of age, and therefore their consent will not do. Please make sure that you have proof of age when you take consent. You have to take assent of a child also. Older children, more than 7 years old, you have to take their assent. Written assent from 12 to 18 and verbal assent from 7 to 12. So you will have two documents, one signed by the parents or the legally accepted representative, and one from the child if she's older than, she or he is older than 12 years old. So the documentation of the consent is done by the participant or the participant's LAR and whoever is the person conducting the research. So you have to also sign, the investigator also must sign that consent form. Now, vulnerability, remember, is about those who are relatively or absolutely incapable of protecting their own interests. Others are responsible to protect them. But we should not exclude these people because the benefits accruing from these trials will be useful to them. And no coercion should be used. There should be additional safeguards. Ethics committee will have to review it. Now, public health and social behavioral can be of any type here as described here. But essentially what you need to understand is group consent is not really adequate. You must also have individual consent. So community consent may be there. You may take community's approval, the community leader's approval, but you must also take the individual participants' consent because, and remember this, because sometimes the leader is somebody who will force people to take part in the research when actually that should not occur. Human genetic research, remember, there are a lot of ethical, legal, and social issues which warrant continuous monitoring by ethics committee. And the ethics committee has to learn and understand how to review genetic studies and look at all these aspects. Now, the last part of ICMR guidelines is about transfer of biospecimens. As I told you before, the MTA has to be in place, ethics oversight is there, and an MOU should be there. The participant owns the sample that you are banking, but the institution or the biobanks are custodians, and the researcher has no claim to that particular sample. Now, there could be anonymous samples, anonymized, delinked, or coded, or linked samples. And more importantly is about the consent. What I want you to understand is, I think it's an important thing if you're storing samples for future use, it is very important to take a blanket or broad consent from the participant when you first collect it. Because that time, the person will say yes or no to you to collect the sample. And it is a good idea to take the blanket or broad consent at that time. You can have tiered consent. Tiered consent meaning that there are different types of things that he will consent to depending upon what he allows. The participant can withdraw consent at any time, and you will have to destroy the sample if the participant withdraws consent. We come to the second type of compliance, which is NDCT rules. NDCT rules were issued on March 19th, 2019, and these rules are made up of 264 pages with 13 chapters, 107 rules, 8 schedules, 27 forms in the 8th schedule. What is important is they talk about the ethics committee registration, ICMR guidelines are notified, So the ICMR guidelines also become law indirectly. And there is post-trial access, and there is composition of the ethics committee described. Now, what is important is two types of ethics committees have been described. One, which is relevant to you all, which is for biomedical and health research. And here the registration is with DHR, Department of Health Research, and they have to function according to the ICMR guidelines. Provisional registration is given for 2 years and the final registration is for 5 years. What is biomedical and health research? Anything that is, this is the law now, remember I'm telling you. Studies on basic applied and operational research and clinical research designed to learn or increase knowledge about diseases and conditions, their detection and cause, and evolving strategies for health promotion, prevention, or amelioration of disease and rehabilitation. Now, the ethics committee has to be constituted in accordance with the ICMR guidelines. Therefore, I think you should remember that ICMR guidelines become very important, and they are applicable to all biomedical, social, and behavioral science research for health conducted in India. And ICMR guidelines are legally mandatory for biomedical and health research. And I think as we just talked, I understand that your ethics committee is registered with the Department of Health Research, and therefore they are very well within the law. Now, for compensation, biomedical and health research also has to be compensated for research-related injury, and it will be as per the ICMR guidelines. Remember that it is now mandatory by law to reimburse a participant for any research-related injury. I don't want to go more into the details of the laws because I don't think you all are going to be doing clinical trials. But if you want, there are FAQs in the CDESCO website. Please go there and check that out. We come now to the last part of my talk, which is of GCP. Now, good clinical practices came up because a lot of research was happening all over the world, and there was no standard, uniform standard that would tell you how to do that research. And therefore, this was a joint initiative by regulators and industry from US, EU, and Japan, and 3 observers, WHO, Canada, and the IFPMA, which came together and wrote these, make the International Conference on Harmonization, ICH, as it was then called, 1996. Then the International Conference on Harmonization became International Council for Harmonization. That is what it is today. And this was in 2016. And they issued a number of guidelines: quality, safety, efficacy, and miscellaneous. And it is the efficacy E6 is what we are interested in. And E6, which is the good clinical practice, it should be research practice, but for some reason they called it GCP. It is essentially to protect the rights of research participants and to ensure credibility of the data. And it is a standard for clinical studies for across the design, conduct, monitoring, recording, auditing, and reporting. And it provides stakeholders a good framework, a standardized framework according to similar rules and to conform to highest ethical and scientific background. And it runs through the entire process of the trial from planning to data analysis. And they have now issued in 2016, I think, they have issued an addendum to this GCP. It is November 2016. And this is essentially because there is advances in electronic data recording and reporting. They have made certain changes, mainly for sponsors and not for all of us. There are 13 principles in GCP which we should know. Clinical trials should be conducted in compliance with the Declaration of Helsinki, GCP, and applicable regulatory guidances. The trial should be undertaken only if the benefits justify the risk. Please remember this. Rights and safety and well-being of the trial subjects should prevail over the interests of science and society. Adequate data should be there to support the proposed clinical trial, justify that you need a clinical research. Clinical trials should be scientifically sound and described in a protocol which must be approved by an ethics committee. The medical care decisions should be the responsibility of a qualified physician. So you may need to have a qualified physician as a co-investigator with you. And remember, this is important because you should not do a clinical study unless you have these type of people with you who will be able to take care of adverse events if at all they occur. And each individual should be involved, should be qualified by education, training, and experience. There should be a freely given informed consent from every subject prior to clinical trial participation, and all the information should be recorded, handled, and stored irrespective of the media used to allow for accurate reporting and interpretation and verification. And lastly, quality assurance should be implemented. The confidentiality and privacy should be protected, and the investigational product, if at all that is relevant, should be stored as per GMP. Now, there are 4 stakeholders and all the responsibilities have been described except the regulator, of course, the institutions and IRB, the investigator, and the sponsor. And all these people's responsibilities are also described, which I'm not going to go into. And of course, at the center of it all is the patient. So I end over here by telling you that Sreelekha will now talk about the applicable EC SOPs, which you will have to do. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Dr. Thatte. We will take the questions after Sreelekha's presentation.
Yes.
So good morning, everyone. So first of all, thank you, Professor Devjani and team for giving me an opportunity to speak in this platform, along with Dr. Thatte. So without much of an introduction, let's start. So what does EC does? So that's most of the things Dr. Thatte has covered. So I'll mostly look into the, my presentation will be more on the review process, which is being done at IIT. So what does IC at IIT Bombay does? So IC review all types of biomedical and health related research proposals for its compliance. And we follow the ICMR guidelines, and it is done through a transparent documented procedure. And the most important thing is, as Dr. Thatte mentioned, before start of the study, the proposal should be submitted and get it approved, and no retrospective review or approval of the study will be given. So the students sometimes come to us asking that, can we submit this proposal and start the study? No, it's not like that. You have to submit the study, get it reviewed by the committee, get the approval, and then only you are ready to go. The research can start. So that's how it works at IIT Bombay. Means at any ethics committee, it works like that only. So now, if these are the questions which, if we answer during this presentation, if I give a brief overview of these questions, then we will, most of the things which is required for submitting a proposal and understanding how the process of IEC at IITB goes. So you will understand that. So the first is, what is the composition? Who reviews your proposal? So the question many times is, who are reviewing this? Who gave these comments? So those questions comes. So what is the composition of Institute Ethics Committee at IIT Bombay? So presently, Dr. Renuka Munshi, Professor Head and Clinical Pharmacology, TN Medical College, is a chairperson. And as per ICMR guidelines, director has approved this committee with medico-legal experts, clinicians, basic scientists, social scientists, and community representatives. And we at IRCC, Dean R&D office, myself and Rishida Rajmohan, we liaise with the faculty members, researchers, as well as with the committee members, IEC committee members. So you can see the list of IEC members here. So medical legal experts are Dr. Subodh Surur and Dr. Pritnya Talvarikar. And clinicians are Dr. Arvind Mishram. He's an ex officio. He is a CMO in charge of IIT Hospital. Dr. Nisha Shah, she is an ex-CMO in charge IIT Hospital. And Dr. Milan Gurjar and Dr. Jyoti Sankley. And basic scientists, you must be familiar with all this, the faculty members, Professor Norona from Chemical Engineering and Professor Sreelekha Nayak. And Dr. Naik is the former director of Hafkin Institute for Training. And social scientists are also our own faculty members, Professor Sarthak Gaurav, Professor C.D. Sebastian, and Professor Ranshan Kumar Panda. And community representatives are Ms. Manisha and Ms. Sridevi. And of course, safety officer of IIT Bombay, Mr. Sajid, was also a part of the committee. Because, and he's a part of biosafety committee also, because there are a lot of samples which are being handled in the labs. So the biosafety is an important aspect when when the samples are being handled. So he is also a member of this committee to look into those kind of aspects. Now, the second question is, though Dr. Thatte has explained why is ethics clearance required, I'll just quickly go through that. So it's very critical when the study involves human participation, especially when there is a vulnerable population, and also when sharing the confidential information involving the human subjects. And next is the biological, clinical, health-related study. When there is any of these kind of samples involved, biological data, biological studies, so then ethical clearance is required. Then when there is a medical device, as a medical device is made and it has to be tested. So in that case also the ethics clearance is required. And when there is an academic study which involves any physical intervention, that time also we require ethical clearance. And nowadays it has become mandatory for all the funding agencies and the publishers that the researcher, the PI, should submit an ethics clearance certificate. So in that case also it is required. And regulatory studies, though we don't do, we review the proposal as a secondary EC. So there will be a primary EC which is approved under DCGI, which reviews the regulatory studies. But as IIT BPI's project, we as a secondary EC review these proposals. Maybe at the end, when we are taking up the question and answers, Dr. Thatte can advise if I have missed anything in this list. And next is who should submit this proposal and where to find the details of these submissions and whom to contact, where to submit, etc. So first is who should submit this proposal. So only IIT faculty members, IIT Bombay faculty members can submit proposals to IIT Ethics Committee. And if it is a student projects, for example, MTech student, MDes student projects, BTech or MTech student projects, then it has to be routed through the project supervisors. And next is where you can find the details of submission. So I can quickly go to that page where all the details regarding the submission to IIT Ethics Committee is given. Are you able to see the screen?
Are you sharing the entire screen or the presentation? In that case, we might have to switch.
Yeah, so I'll come back to this. Then this page, I'll come back to it later, towards the end of the presentation. So now I have shared this presentation only. So that's why. Just a minute. So I'm back in the presentation, right? Yeah.
Yes.
So now where to submit this proposals, IEC proposals. So you can submit the proposal, send your proposal to IEC at IRCC. To this email address, you can send the proposal. And our office is in Dean R&D office, IRCC. and myself and Rishida are facilitating all these IEC review processes. So the next question is the crux of this presentation, basically IEC review process at IIT Bombay. So we have basically 3 types of reviews. One is a full board review, and second is an expedited review, and the third is an exempted review. So all these the proposals comes in different categories, and if it requires a full board review, that will be taken up in that process. And if it less than minimal risk and some anonymized data, so then it can be reviewed by the primary reviewers and taken up in the expedited review mode. And if it is, if it can be in the exempted category, so then with the approval of chairperson, we consider that proposal in the exempted category and give the approval. So in majority of the cases, the proposals come for the full board review. So here the PI submit the proposal to IEC. I'll give the checklist later. The proposal, what are required for the proposal submission. So the PI submits, the ITB PI submits a proposal to IEC. So after the initial scrutiny, we at IRCC, we send these proposals to primary reviewers, who are the committee members, IEC committee members. And they meticulously go through these projects, these proposals, and give their feedback. And that we communicate to the faculty members, the PIs. And in maybe a second iterations, like a revised proposal may be sent by the PI for further review, or with that responses, the PA gives a presentation or comes for a discussion with the IEC members in the IEC meetings. And after the discussion, the committee's recommendations are sent to the PI, and the response to those recommendations are incorporated in the proposal and sent back to the committee. And either it can be approved by the primary reviewers, or if the committee has suggested that it has to go for another full board discussion, then it will be taken up in that full board discussion, the next full board discussion, and the approval will be given in due course. So that is what happens in a full board review. In the expedited review, mostly it happens over email. So there is no discussion in person discussion with the PI. The proposal is submitted by the PI, and the primary reviewers suggest whether it can be considered in the expedited mode, or it has to go to the full board. So if it has to go to the full board, again it goes to the full board review. If not, then the feedback of the primary reviewers is sent to the faculty members, and the response is being checked by the primary reviewers, PRs, and finally the approval will be given. And for exempted, the same thing, the proposal is submitted with a request for exemption of IEC review, and then that is reviewed by the chairperson, and the approval will be issued. So this is basically the IEC process which is involved at IIT Bombay. And now for reviewing all these, what are the quorum requirements for quorum requirements in IEC? So every proposal should be discussed at least once in the meeting. And for a full board review, the quorum requirement is the legal expert, clinician, basic scientist, social scientist, and community. All these members should be present as a part of discussion to review this proposal in a full board. And if required, an external expert can be called, or expert's opinion can be sought for a particular proposal. And for expedited review, since it involves less than minimal risk, it may be reviewed, it can be reviewed by the primary reviewers, and that can be approved over emails. And the third, which as I mentioned, is exempted, which is approved by the chairperson directly. And now I think it's a quick checklist which we can good to go for the submission of the proposal. And that is, the PA has to submit the proposal in the IEC format, which is already there in the R&D webpage, which I'll show you just after this, finishing this slide. Then ICF, you know that Dr. Thatte has mentioned how important is ICF. The informed consent for any study, informed consent is a very important part. So informed consent is in English, and in any local languages. Suppose if the participants does not know English and they are recruiting participants who only knows Marathi or Hindi. So then in the ICF, informed consent form in the local languages also should be submitted along with the proposal. And brief curriculum vitae of the principal investigator and the study researchers, and undertaking with signatures of the investigators, and memorandum of understanding in case of studies involving collaboration with other hospitals or any other institutes, and any additional requirements like EC clearances of other hospitals, then administrative approvals as mentioned by Dr. Thatte, and also suppose it involves handling of samples of by students, then the proper vaccination certificate, etc., etc. So these are the requirements. These all documents as a single document we request to submit during the submission, and then we forward it to the primary reviewers. And the process, as we mentioned earlier, we follow all these review procedures. I think now we are good to go with the checklist to submit the proposal, and I'll take up questions towards the end, and I'll just share the page where all the details of so here it is. So you can see that this is Dean Arandi's webpage, where in academia, if you go, there is Institute Ethics Committee. So we generally, till last year, we had bi-monthly meetings, but considering the increase in number of proposals, we have added 2 more meetings, one in April and one in October, additional meetings, so that we can take care of, because otherwise there will be 8 to 9 number of proposals per meeting and difficult to review all of them. So we have increased the number of meetings from this year, and we have all the formats for the submission here, templates, informed consent form templates, and the details of the composition of the committee here, and guidelines, of course, for the reference. As Dr. Thatte said, so this is the Bible guidelines 2017 for IC. So even when there's a query which I'm not able to answer when I receive a call or a meeting, I just open this. You just type the word in that Control F and that word. So you will get the answer in no time. So before submitting the proposal, if you can go through these guidelines, that is the best thing to submit a foolproof proposal to IIT ethics committees, any ethics committees. And so that's it. So we have, so as Dr. Thatte mentioned, we have been registered with the any CRVH or DHR, and the provisional registration is for 2 years, and we will be renewing it in the for next year. So for the full registration. So that's it from my end, and I would be happy to take any questions and advice of Dr. Thatte. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Dr. Gopinathan. So I think, Sneha, please confirm. I think the questions can be posted in the chat, or if a participant can raise their hand and we can unmute them to ask the question themselves.
So the questions have been posted in the chat, so the participants can continue to post it in the chat.
Okay, all right. So let me start by asking a question that I had, because this was new to me. Is it possible to expand a bit on when proposals undergo full expedited and exempted review? I mean, what, from a PI's point of view, how would we judge what is considered less than minimal risk? Or can we submit for full review and let the committee take that decision?
Yeah, so essentially the committee has to take the decision. You have to submit the full proposal. The investigator shouldn't take the decision of expedited or exempt from review. You can apply if it is documented, if you're doing research on publicly available documents, like a meta-analysis, if you're doing a meta-analysis or on publicly available information like the data on the DHR or data on, like we've done one research study recently where we've looked at the registrations and re-registrations of ethics committees and different aspects of this. And we have looked at it, we took an exemption from review for that because all this is in the public domain. There are no individuals that we talk to. So from that point of view, but my suggestion is you don't take the decision. Let the ethics committee take the decision. And the reason it is taken now, what is minimal risk? Minimal risk is the risk that you will entertain during your day-to-day life. So less than minimal risk is when you are not doing it. Blood collection has its own risk. So even if you're doing one blood collection, it still has its risk. It has a small risk. So it's not less than minimal risk. So it can't go to expedited review, even if it's one blood collection. And we also have issues about storing the data, about confidentiality, all that the ethics committee has to look at. So it should go to full board.
Okay. Thank you so much. This is very helpful. May I actually, when we registered participants for this webinar, we took some questions during registration. So first I'm going to take those questions, and I remind the participants once again to please post your questions in the chat. That's less disruptive. So the first one is that there's a question that if we need to keep sharing the progress with ethics committee, or is it a one-time activity? And if there is any modifications of the data set collected, should they resubmit proposals and go through the entire cycle, or is there a way to submit an addendum?
There is a way to submit an addendum. It's called a protocol amendment. So if there is some more data that you're collecting, or because in the course of the research you feel something has to be added, you should do it, but please submit it to the EC and start doing it only after you get the approval. Otherwise it will be invalid, the research. Okay. So yes, you can do that. And the first question was about continued monitoring. Ethics committee is expected to receive an annual report of your research. Most of the time the research gets over within 6 months. So then there is no question of an annual report. But if it goes on for a longer period of time, then every year you should submit a report about what is your status, how many patients have you seen. I don't know, Sreelekha, do you have a requirement for submission of annual reports?
Yes, we do have. We sent out emails to the faculty members, PIs, to submit the continuation report, and we do review those continuation reports. And of course, when it comes for amendment, that is more important. So because after 2 years, they submit an amendment request, then we definitely ask for a continuation report. What has happened to the study, in the how many participants you have recruited, and what is the outcome. So that is mandatory when it comes for an amendment. And otherwise also we request the faculty members to submit the continuation report.
Yeah. So there is a continued interaction with the ethics committee. Okay. The ethics committee is expected to review, is expected to oversee the safety of the participants. So they do it in different ways. They, for example, sometimes they may ask for consent forms and see how you have signed consent forms. You can do that, Sreelekha. You can ask for some consent forms to be sent to you so that you know that they are taking consent forms correctly. Your researchers, especially those where there are greater risks.
Yes, definitely.
And please do remember this thing about the students being very young. If they're 16 or 17, they cannot give consent. And if I know right, some of the first year students may be 16 or 17. 17 definitely.
Okay. There is a question which is not very clear, but I'm going to read this out. They would like to know more about what's the requirement if the experiment involves some non-invasive stimulation techniques.
Same procedures is the same.
Okay.
There is no difference. You don't take the decision. You submit it to the ethics committee. Let them take a decision that this is non-invasive. This is so let's do expedited. Whatever they want to do, they can do. Let the EC decide. You don't take the responsibility.
Okay. Then there's a question on what happens if somebody wants to use animal blood from slaughterhouse. Is it covered in this? Or
Not in the
that's a
human
different?
clinical research. It is covered in the animal CPC SEA guidelines. There is an animal ethics committee which is supposed to review these protocols.
Okay. And Sreelekha, do we have such a procedure here since we don't have an animal house? I mean, to follow.
So we don't, we suggest that they can contact animal ethics committees of other collaborators, basically.
Okay.
So we got some queries and then we suggested that they can, I think ATREC, I think probably must be
Yes.
having a
Yes.
ethics committee, animal ethics committee. And in Pune also there are some
Yes.
organizations, yeah.
Okay, okay, that's very useful. Then there's a question in the context of the COVID pandemic, are there any new rules regarding collection of saliva samples?
Not only saliva, but there is a whole ICMR guidance document about COVID-19. Doing research in COVID-19. Again, I'll tell you to go to the website and have a look at it. But it talks about many things. Importantly, for example, for the first time, they're allowing us to have online meetings. Those online meetings were never there. They always said that you have to meet in person and have a meeting. But now, for the first time, they're allowing online meetings and allowing us to do many other things that we couldn't do before the pandemic.
Okay, let me take.
But go to the website again. There, the ICMR website has all these guidelines.
Okay.
Yeah, adding to that, we have actually posted the same document in our web page also, like during this COVID pandemic time. So this was a query. So the same document has been uploaded in our web page for the easy access for the researchers.
Okay. Okay. I will take a couple of questions from the chat now before I go back to that list. The first is, for collaborative work, if we are getting anonymized health data from some collaborator, like a rehab institute or clinics outside IITB for data analysis, do we need to submit the same kind of details to IRCC and get approval before analysis?
To my mind, yes, because IITB will be one of the co-authors. So you will have to take your ethics committee approval.
Okay. The next question is, if we access a large set of retrospective anonymized data, say 1 lakh persons data, whose consent is to be obtained in that case?
So if it is anonymized data, you can submit for consent waiver. I didn't take it in my discussion, but waiver of consent is allowed in certain cases, especially if it is anonymized data. But you have to take ethics committee approval for the consent waiver.
Okay. Okay. Then another question is, this is from a student. I am working on wastewater surveillance to detect pathogens. And I have after discussion with the public health office, I have located sites in campus to collect the wastewater sample. We are not covering biosafety. So I'll say, what kind of ethics clearances will we need?
I don't think this involves human participants at all. Yeah. So I don't think there is ethics committee approval in this. What do you think, Sreelekha?
Yeah, I also agree with you, ma'am, because it does not involve any human participation. So they are collecting samples, water, and doing some analysis of pathogens. So it doesn't come under the purview of IEC.
Yeah, I agree with you. Yeah.
Okay. This is a question that is marked to Dr. Gopinathan that says, I would request you to throw some light on the procedure as follows. Suppose someone wants to acquire cancer tissue samples from Tata Memorial Hospital, what will be the procedure in the series?
So, first, I think from the repository, if they are collecting the tissues, they should approach the repository for procuring the samples and whatever formalities TMH or wherever they're approaching, so that they have to follow. And they have to submit a proposal to IEC because it involves human samples, and biosafety clearance, of course, will be required. And as per the regular procedure for a full board discussion, and and there might be an MOU, MTA requirement will be there. Isn't it, Dr. Thatte?
Yes, yes.
Yeah.
There will be an MTA requirement, and most importantly, the Tata Ethics Committee will also have to approve it.
Yes, yeah.
Okay. Then there's a question for market research, say asking price that is customer is ready to pay for a medical device. Do we need ethics committee approval?
Sorry, can you read that? Say
Yeah.
that again.
So for market research, so before starting a project, let's say to ask a price that a customer is ready to pay for a medical device that is going to be developed, does that also need ethics committee approval?
It depends on how you're going to take. I would take ethics committee approval. I would take it because you can't get it retrospectively, and a publication house may say that you needed ethics committee approval for this. So I don't see why you shouldn't take it. What is the delay? I mean, you submit as soon as your proposal is ready, you submit it to the ethics committee and take their approval. Don't waste your time doing something else. Take the approval. It takes time, I know, but because it takes time, you can't avoid it.
Okay. The next question is for awareness research, say asking hospital IT managers whether they're aware of digital health, do we need ethics committee approval? I
Yes.
would assume very similar.
Yes, yes.
Yeah.
So you need for that, definitely for that you need, because you're going to interview people. So the questionnaire also has to be submitted. What is the questions that you're going to ask? How sensitive are they? Are they going to harm the person who you're interviewing?
Okay, I am going to go back to the questions people have posted before the webinar, and that is, this is, I think, from another student. This is, I want to ask about the procedure for getting an approval for stem cell isolation from placenta/umbilical cord/human tissue other than embryo. In this case, they would like to know whether there is a specific stem cell committee to approach for ethics, or would it, before it goes to IEC, or do they go straight away to IEC? And then they also want to know what is required from the hospital collaborator who is supplying the tissue.
So usually there is a stem cell committee. I don't know if IIT has it, but a stem cell committee has to approve it. It has to go to the National Stem Cell Committee also. Although that is routine if it is a registered committee. And you do need their approval before IEC looks at it. IEC is different. IEC will also look at it.
So Sreelekha, do we have a committee here, or how?
No, we don't have an stem cell committee here. It's not constituted yet. We received some queries from IIT PIs regarding this. So as Dr. Thatte mentioned, we suggested that if there are hospitals around Mumbai where there is a there are some stem cell committees, and we suggested that, like, that is an informal discussion since we are all IITians and Dr. Thatte here. So I'm saying whether we can collaborate with those hospitals to get the stem cell committee approval. And then we may look into this, IEC may look into those proposals. And of course, then if they are registered with the National Stem Cell Committee, so those appropriate approval that Stem Cell Committee will be taking, and then they can submit the proposal to IEC's, IITB IEC's purview. That's what we suggested. As of now, we don't have.
There's just one thing which I wanted to add to this, that remember the consent has to be taken from the participant before you can take the placenta or whatever organ you want to take. Now, this consent should be taken before the woman is in labor. So it is very difficult and very important that the investigator meets the participant beforehand, not when she's under duress in labor. You can't take consent because at that time she'll say yes to anything without understanding because she's in pain.
Yes.
And also the doctor who is involved in the study, I think there should be an MOU between the PI, means the institute.
Yeah,
and
there should be that MOU between all collaborating institute is a must.
Yeah.
And secondly, if you want to take stem cell, but remember this, if you want to take stem cell from the umbilical cord and the placenta, taking the consent of the woman prior to her onset of labor is very important.
Okay.
Usually they will not say no because both of these organs are discarded. So
Okay.
there is no issue there. It's not as though it's useful afterwards or anything. So I'm sure you can do that. Nobody will say no to it.
Okay. There is an interesting that we have this incubator sign on IIT Bombay campus. So what is the policy of the research that involves, clinical samples for the healthcare startups that involve IITB faculty and students? So this is not being done as part of IITB, but as a part of a company that they have incubated. Does the same committee look at it?
Sreelekha will answer that.
So it should be like sign companies cannot directly give proposals to IECIT for the approval. So if a faculty member is involved in this study, then the faculty member can submit a proposal. And if a company is involved, then there should be some understanding MOU between this IIT and the signed company. MOU for the whatever benefits, risk, whatever is there, and yeah, that's it. So the PI can submit. If even if it is a signed startup study, if it is associated with that company.
So if SIGN, for example, has companies which have no IITB faculty member or student as a part of it, then they cannot approach IIT Bombay's IEC. Do you understand?
So there are, yes. So there are independent IECs, ma'am, right? Dr. Thatte?
Yes.
Yeah. So there they can submit the proposal and get it approved.
Okay. Then there is it's more like a topic than a question, but I'll read out. So if somebody developing a software for analyzing biomedical data, does that also require ethics approval?
Depends on if you're taking samples. If you're taking patient samples, then participant samples, then you will have to take.
Okay.
I mean, where is the data coming from? It's going to be some data that's coming to you from some hospital or something, no?
Okay.
If you're analyzing the biomedical health, so even if it's data sets, that's why read the ICMR guideline on data sets. Read those, then you will understand. Everything has to anything that involves humans will have to go through ethics committee.
Okay. I'll take another question from the chat now. So this is from a visiting scholar to IIT Bombay, that my study is a healthcare design based project where there'll be no samples of any kind taken from patients. It's strictly a qualitative research study. What kind of supplementary clearances are necessary? Would an MOU from the clinic that I'm working with be necessary?
Yes, an MOU would be necessary. And if I mistake not, if it is with human beings that you're doing the research, and even if it is qualitative research, you will still have to take approval of ethics committee.
Okay.
Even for qualitative research, behavioral sciences also, you have to take approval.
Okay. Another question from the chat is, if you access data of deceased persons who have passed away, whose consent is to be obtained in that case?
This is of a person whose sample is kept.
Yes.
So that is what I said, that it would be good if you took the broad consent, as in consent for everything, that I will use your sample for research later, etc. If that is done, then you don't need to take anybody's consent because the patient has only consented. When you write in your consent form that I will allow my tissue to be used, or he says, no, I use it only for this research, not for any other research future mein, then you can't use it. But if he has given you permission, then you can use. So take a broad consent so that it allows you to think of doing research, even if the person is deceased.
I think in the interest of time, I'm going to take the last two questions and then hopefully we can keep the conversation going in some other way. So one is, how is international collaboration defined for HMSC clearance? What qualifies this? And I'm assuming it basically means that, is there just a collaborator, or is funding got to be involved for this?
No, any collaborator.
Okay.
No, not only funding. It's any collaborator. If you have any collaboration with any international agency, you need to submit to HMSC.
Okay, and I take the last question from a PhD student who's working on hearing of human subjects, and they have got IEC clearances, and they're requesting if IEC can help them recruit subjects.
No. How can IEC help? IEC is short of hearing.
Okay, all right. So I think we'll stop the questions here for today.
But
And
if they want, they can advertise. They can make an advertisement and submit it to the IEC for approval. Once the IEC approves, then you can use your advertisement to get more patients, participants.
right. I think I have seen such emails coming to faculty notices and so on for of ICE approved studies. Yes. Yeah. Okay. So let me formally thank Dr. Thatte and Dr. Gopinathan
Pleasure.
profusely for taking out time on a Saturday on the Diwali weekend to talk to us. It has been extremely useful, and we have recorded the presentation, and we will make it available on YouTube channel of WRCB for people to refer to in future. So Sreelekha, do use it if there is any need for it in future.
Yes.
And I just want to end by introducing one service that we offer at the Wadhwani Research Centre, which is an external fundraising service. Along with that, along with helping PIs to raise funds to apply for funding, we also hold these webinars to cover different aspects of it, which actually are ancillary, but it helps. So we try to work with IRCC, we try to complement what they are doing, we do this together. So this webinar was the first in the series. Thank you, everybody. Thank you to the participants for coming and sending your questions today. And we hope to see you in another webinar in the future. Thank you very much once again.
Thank you.
Bye.
Thank you.